The Rules Committee will come to order as the Chairman of the Appropriations Committee seeks to get to the table. I want to say that we're here for a measure allowing for further continuing appropriations for fiscal year 2011, HJ Res 48, and we're very happy to welcome my good friend and classmate, the distinguished chair of the Committee on Appropriations, and while he's much older and more senior than I, Mr. Dix, the ranking member, is here as well. And we thank both of you for the tremendous effort that you have put into this. And it's always an honor for us to have the chairman and the ranking member of the Appropriations Committee appear before the Rules Committee. So, gentlemen, let me say that without objection, any prepared statement that you have will appear in the record in its entirety, and we welcome your summary.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for your service and this committee's service. So, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Slaughter, and members of the Rules Committee, we are here to present HJ Res 48, the fiscal 2011 further continuing appropriations resolution. We'd like a traditional rule on the CR to allow for timely consideration and passage so we can avoid a government shutdown. It's my hope that with prompt passage, we will provide the necessary time to complete negotiations on a bill for the rest of this fiscal year. While a short-term measure is not the preferable way to fund the government, this bill is essential to maintain the critical programs and services that the American people rely on for 3 weeks until Congress comes to a final agreement on the remainder of this fiscal year. While keeping the government running until April 8th, this legislation does make $6 billion in spending cuts, cutting $2 billion for every week of funding. Within this CR, 25 programs have been reduced or terminated, saving the American people $3.5 billion. An additional $2.6 billion in earmark account funding has been eliminated. Many of these reductions and terminations have been supported by President Obama in his annual budget requests, as well as members of the Senate. This CR is the third bill that the Appropriations Committee has produced this year that will reduce spending significantly, continuing a trend of cuts that will put a dent in our massive and unsustainable deficits. And with the passage of this bill and the passage of the 2-week CR previous to now, a total of $10 billion will have been cut from 2011 spending, which would make it the largest rescission in the history of the Congress. Given the realities of our debt, the short time frame for action, and the fact that many of these cuts have received bipartisan support in both houses as well as the White House, I anticipate swift passage of the bill so we can continue negotiations on a final agreement, complete the budget process for fiscal 11, and move on to the important work for the next year. We're nearly halfway through the current fiscal year, and it's high time we complete this long overdue work left to us by the previous majority. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers. Mr. Dix.
We are here this evening to consider a rule for HJ Res 48. This measure extends the CR until April 8th. The extension reduces spending in 2011 by $45 billion below the President's request. H.R. 48 also adds another $6 billion in common ground spending reductions. In total, the measure cuts $51 billion below the President's request. The idea behind the 3-week extension is to provide an opportunity for the House, the Senate, and White House to settle all outstanding issues on fiscal year 2011 appropriations. I'm hopeful that negotiations will succeed. Lurching forward under a continuing resolution, facing the possibility of a shutdown every 2 or 3 weeks is not the best way to proceed. I think we all agree on that. So I regret that we are here before you once again, Mr. Chairman, discussing another temporary funding measure that once again includes serious reductions in appropriations for fiscal year 11, which now must be implemented in the 6.5 months that remain before the next fiscal year begins. And again, I still am concerned about the economic impact of these cuts, but I think this CR has to be enacted.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Dixon. I thank both of you, and I think that it is, we've had this ongoing debate on the issue of the impact of spending cuts on job creation, and you and I are on a different side on that one. I believe that getting our fiscal house in order will go a long way towards encouraging job creation, economic growth, which is the goal that we all share. And so, well, you may be sorry to be here. I'm sorry that you have to be here, but it is, as I said, always nice to see both of you. Mr. Sessions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to both of you, Hal and Norm. It's good to see you again. We don't want to make a habit of doing this, I'm sure, but here we go.
We want to do our regular appropriation bills for 2012.
You know, I think that will be you'll be welcome, very welcome then when you do that, Norm, and congratulations on your new job and you working with with Chairman Rogers on this in such a forthright way. Chairman Rogers, there's been a question the last few days about this $105 billion worth of Obamacare that's sitting out there. Is that in 2011 that they're in reference to? Would that be covered in any way under this measure?
Those are authorization matters. In order to get at them, we can't do that on appropriations unless and until the authorizing committee paves the way for us. Those are authorizations and not subject to appropriations.
So that $100 million is in this 2011 budget? I was led to believe maybe they were over a series of years that really we're not addressing.
Are you talking about the $105 billion?
Right.
Well, as I understand it, in the Obamacare bill that passed and became law, there are different events that take place in the future that triggers spending by the authorization bill, not the appropriation
right.
bill. Now, in the H.R. 1 that we passed in the House 3 or 4 weeks ago, the big continuing resolution for the rest of the year, there are provisions in that bill that does cut off Obamacare funding
for 11.
For 11.
So the $100 billion, if I said million, I meant to say billion. The $105 billion then is simply in not the appropriations, simply in the authorization that's moving forward.
And it's over a course of time.
And then over, which is really what I was trying to get at, the 14 through 19, 20.
But if we pass H.R. 1, if the Congress passes H.R. 1 and the President signs it, it becomes a law, 11 funding this current year for Obamacare would be terminated.
What is the
status?
status?
The appropriations portion of it.
Do you know the status of that bill at all once it left the
H.R.
House?
1? Well, we passed it in the House by a rather substantial margin. We sent it to the Senate for them to give us their bill. They haven't done that yet. We're still waiting for the Senate to lay a bill on the table. Now, they did have votes rejecting both H.R. 1 and a bill that their Appropriations Committee came up with. They voted no on both.
So effectively, the House is on record saying we want to, in a majority vote, we want to defund all of Obamacare for at least 2011.
Yeah.
Already done that.
Well, the House
and it
has.
sits.
The House has.
Well,
yeah.
not.
And we're waiting for the Senate. I mean, how can you negotiate with yourself?
It is an interesting proposition. Thanks for both of you for being here. Yield back.
Ms. Slaughter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You are negotiating, are you not?
The conversations are going on.
That was my understanding. What you just said sort of indicated to me that you were negotiating by yourself, but I don't know that to be true. There were votes on both bills. The House, the Senate bill went down, as did H.R. 1. Not enough votes for either one of them. I think, like everybody else here, I don't like slouching toward the end here by funding the United States government in 2-week and 3-week intervals. That really does not become us very much. At the same time, I want us to be very careful that we don't cut things to the bone There are a lot of things in here that concern me, but I understand that we have to get on with it, and everybody on my side seems to have signed off on this. But we would like to have an open rule. We would like to be able to contest some of the things in here, but I don't think that's going to happen either. So let me be the third to welcome two of you back to the committee. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, if I could take a moment to Mr. Sessions' question about the $105 billion and the Obamacare funding. Let me give you a prepared statement that I think sums it up better than I perhaps have. H.R. 1 terminated all discretionary funding for Obamacare, the bill that passed the House. Every dollar for Obamacare that was available for the committee and the House to eliminate was swept up and taken out through both the underlying bill and through multiple amendments that occurred on the floor. Any other spending for Obamacare is mandatory, not the jurisdiction of the Appropriations Committee, and therefore can't be addressed through CRs or any other appropriations bill. It's now up to the authorizing committees to do what they can to address this mandatory spending and remove the remaining taxpayer funds for this job-killing law. That, I think, clarifies it perhaps better.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to be number 4 to say thank you very much to both of you. As I expressed to you on the floor last week, I know both of you have been working extraordinarily hard this session in working on the continuing resolution, and I think it bears repeating several times that what you are doing, and Mr. Rogers, you said this sort of at the tail end of your comments, and perhaps in a little bit lower voice, that basically what we're doing now is repairing what was not done last year. Because our colleagues across the aisle did not pass the appropriations bills last year, we are doing our best to keep the government running. I think that for many Americans, they don't quite understand that. We use terms like CR and assume everybody understands that, but it is the continuing of what was funding for the year 2010. And I think it's extremely important that we point that out. We haven't gotten into the appropriations process, as Mr. Dix said, for the next year, but we are really consumed by taking care of this. And there were votes on the legislation we sent to the Senate, and there was a vote on the Senate's cuts, which I think were $6 billion. Ours was $51 billion. And it's my understanding that the bill from the House got 2 more votes than the Senate bill, Pat.
Our cut was 61.
61, right. And I do think, again, that it's important to explain that everything you could do, the Appropriations Committee could do to cut the funding for what we call Obamacare has been done.
That's correct.
I think that really needs to be said over and over and over again.
I've said it over and over again. I'm afraid. I hope I'm not boring people with saying it, but it's true. And the gentlelady is absolutely correct. The reason we're here is that last year, when the Democrats controlled the House, they didn't pass a single appropriations bill out of the 12. And we came to January when the Republicans took over in the House, and the Democrats had passed a continuing resolution to continue the government till March the 4th.
From October 1 to March the 4th.
From October 1, the beginning of the fiscal year, till March the 4th of 2011, simply because they hadn't passed any appropriations bill to keep the government going. They passed this catch-all bill to keep us going till March the 4th. So we came into power, if you will, with that laying on our lap. And so we've been trying to keep the government going, even while we're trying to cut exorbitant, wasteful spending, and that's why we're here.
And the other point, you mentioned discretionary spending and mandatory spending and appropriations and authorizations. Again, those are terms we throw around here that we think people know, but mandatory spending is something Congress established that category many years ago when Congress didn't want, I think, to deal on a year-to-year basis with how to appropriate money for certain programs, and they're just on automatic pilot. And again, I think most people don't understand that a huge segment of what we spend is on automatic pilot.
2/3 of it is automatic pilot. We appropriate maybe 1/3 at most of the annual budget, and more than half of that is for defense. So we're left with roughly 15% that we're cutting from here.
Right. And I think the other thing that probably should be pointed out is that there will be under consideration in various subcommittees of appropriations moving some of the spending for Obamacare that's in mandatory category into the discretionary category. Am I correct about that?
Gentlelady is absolutely correct. We've already begun hearings on the 012 bills. In fact, we've already held maybe 60 subcommittee hearings in all 12 subcommittees. And during the 012 process, during these hearings that we're having for next year's bills, efforts will be made to take out the Obamacare spending for next year, the ones that we can, that are appropriated funds. And then those funds that are in that bill that sort of go off automatically by the law in years to come, if we can convert those mandatory requirements in the law to where they're subject to annual appropriations, then we can disappropriate those funds.
So one more comment, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be done. We have voted on a bill to repeal Obamacare. We did that. We have voted to take out all the funding for Obamacare that's in discretionary funding.
That legally we can do.
Right. We have a plan to move money that's in mandatory category into discretionary category so we can cut that next year. So basically, under the rules with which we operate here in the Congress, we have done everything we know to do up till this point, and we're planning to do more in the future to defund that program.
The gentlelady has said it better than I have.
Well, I want to thank you because I think...
If I could just make a comment.
Certainly.
You know, there's still the Senate that has to pass these things, and the president has to sign them into law. So I appreciate all the self-congratulations here, but the chances of this becoming law are de minimis at best, and I think it's time to focus on trying to work this thing out, get an agreement on 11, and let's start working on 12. And let's do our job and not fantasize about what you're going to do on Obamacare.
Well, Mr. Dix, thank you so much.
I just couldn't help myself.
Thank you. Thank you for pointing out that the House, the Republicans in the majority in the House are not the majority all over Washington. There are other people who are affecting this. And I would like to say, Mr. Chairman, there's a group of young women in here from the Public Leadership Education Network. Their first time to be in the Rules Committee, and then they're going to go see votes. And they're from all over the country. I haven't identified exactly where, but I do want to point out. No. But I do want to point out that one of the great niece of one of our former colleagues is here, Miss Regula from Ohio.
Oh, wonderful.
And they were all excited.
He was a member of the Appropriations Committee, I should
Correct.
say, and chaired a subcommittee.
Interior.
Thank you, Interior Subcommittee. So we miss him, and please give him our best, and thank you very, very much for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Very strongly. He believed in earmarks.
Yes. Mr. McGovern.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And again, I want to welcome both of you back to the committee. It really is interesting to reflect on the speeches we've heard, I agree with Mr. Dix that we need to get down to business and deal with reality and not fantasy. But it is somewhat incredible to me to have so many of my friends on the other side take glee in the potential or the thought of cutting health care programs that will provide people health care. I mean,
For 36 million
right,
Americans.
for 36 million Americans, and maybe that's where they think the majority of the American people are. I just don't I don't believe it, and I also find it somewhat offensive that the President of the United States' name gets denigrated in the way that it constantly does by referring to it as Obamacare, as if it's somehow a swear word. It's a health care reform bill to try to provide millions of people in this country health care. And I hope very much that you don't succeed in cutting benefits to people, because health care reform is not a job killer. Providing people health care actually will help create jobs and actually save money in the long term. The other thing is that
CBO said, I think it was like $257 billion over the next 10 years
and I
would be saved by having this law stay in place. That's caused a few stirs.
And I appreciate the fact that we need to figure out a way to continue to have the government operate for the next few weeks. But at some point, I mean, this really is kind of the third CR. You had the H.R. 1. We had a CR that you passed for 2 weeks. Now we're going for a third CR. At some point, you got to kind of take responsibility, and it's on your watch.
Well, if you'll yield,
yes.
That's because your party didn't pass any of the 12 appropriations bills for this year.
Well, as you know, we could have gotten a long-term agreement, but we had the Republicans in the Senate who refused to cooperate. Now, having said that, I think the deal right now is that you can only blame last year so many times. I mean, this is the third time up to bat. I hope it's the last, but I mean, I'm not going to bet the house on that fact. And I think part of the problem is that what you passed in H.R. 1 is so extreme that you have even some of the members of your own party on the other side, on the other body, who are somewhat uncomfortable with that. And so, at some point, I think we need to kind of deal with reality and try to get a long-term bill passed.
If you would talk to your colleagues in the other body,
tell
them to lay an offer on the table. We passed a bill.
Well,
they haven't, and refused to.
I just came back from my district, and I'll tell you, mayors and city managers all say the same thing. We can't plan for this year. You all talk about jobs, creating jobs. We can't implement what we thought we had for this year. They're worried about their community development block grant monies. They're worried about programs that, quite frankly, create opportunities in cities and towns all across the country, and they're not sure whether H.R. 1 is real, and if it is, then they're in one spot, or whether or not there's going to be some sort of a compromise. So this kind of drip of continuing resolutions is a disincentive for job creation back home, and I just hope that this is it. I mean, I hope that
I agree with you.
And we can blame last year's Congress all we want, but the fact is, it's on your watch now. We're here now. This is the third time.
Look, we've passed a bill. We've made our offer.
Yeah, what you passed though was a bill that was so extreme.
Come back with
no
some provision. Well, if you consider it extreme, we'll have a chance to talk. But we can't talk if you don't put something on the table.
Well, you told Mr. Slaughter that in fact you are talking with the Senate, and my hope is that there'll be some agreement that there needs to be a little bit of moderation on your side, so we can actually something that can pass. The other thing, that people complain to me about is in H.R. 1. They asked the question: did anybody in Congress ever do a hearing as to what the impact of some of these cuts are going to be? And the answer is no. I mean, put a bill together, brought it to the floor, without any real thought to what the implications of some of these cuts would be.
Look, we debated that bill for 4 days, 90 hours, 600 amendments.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
you were a part of the conversation.
Right, and some of these important issues were debated for 10 minutes. But the reality is that kind of the free for all we had on the House floor, is not a substitute for thoughtful, committee hearings
You're saying that we weren't thoughtful of it.
You know, I'll tell you, I look at that process and don't, I would call it a lot of things. I wouldn't call it thoughtful, in my opinion. And anyway, I hope this is the last time, but this is your third time. This is the third time here. And at some point, I think you're going to have to take responsibility for whether we move forward or we don't. I think that.
Thank you, Mr. Governor. Let me just say, over the last 4 years, we've had an 84% increase in non-defense discretionary spending, and that obviously played a big role in the outcome that we saw on November 7th,
Well, if the
which was
gentleman
a pretty
yield.
strong message that was sent.
I think that
By the American people.
the questions I'm getting
I'm
back.
happy to yield, my friend.
The questions I'm getting back home are, did anybody, you know, when they propose cuts in the National Institutes of Health, has anybody that did a hearing on what that means and how that holds up research?
If I could reclaim my time, let me say that the gentleman knows that no one is proposing cuts in the National Institutes of Health. When you've had an 84% increase in non-defense discretionary spending, we have had a doubling to the NIH, and the notion of saying that paring that back
We are
is
paring
part
it
of the
back,
message,
yeah.
is part of the message that was sent by the American people is the right thing.
I-
I thank my friend. Let me recognize Mr.
I would argue that investing in
Bishop.
NIH research creates jobs as well as helps deal with some terrible problems that people are dealing with right now.
Can I reclaim my time? Thank you. I appreciate that. Let me be number 6 to welcome you here, and apparently number 6 to hope you don't come back without a 2012 budget
Till we
in
get
your
the
hand.
12 bill.
Yeah, till 2012 is available with the appropriations. I do appreciate the difficult situation we're in. I don't want to expand our discussion into a different area, although I think I will with this comment. I was in the chair when the question of the use of the term Obamacare came to the floor. And as it was discussed at that time, Obamacare is not either a pejorative or a complimentary term. It's just a term of art similar to Reaganomics or the Bush tax cuts. If indeed Obamacare was considered to be somewhat derogatory, it would have to mean the underlying bill that created Obamacare would have to be derogatory. So I think that was the ruling that we had on the floor at the time. I think it's an appropriate one that simply says we build into terms what we want to build into terms, but it does not necessarily have to be in that particular way. Appreciate you being here, and like I say, when I see you again, hopefully there is a new appropriations bill in your hand.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd ask either of my colleagues, I did the count. It was 11 Republicans that said Obamacare and 2 Democrats. Now, I'm the 3rd Democrat to say it. While I agree with Mr. Bishop with regard to the pejorative nature, perhaps of matters of this kind, the way it is intended, and I echo the sentiments of my colleagues, Mr. McGovern, the way it's intended by my colleagues when they say it, it's almost as if it's something nasty. And I, for one, would wonder what did you call what the health care program in America was before the Democrats in the House of Representatives and the United States Senate passed a measure that took all too much time, in my judgment, to do and did not go nearly as far as it needs to go. So what kind of care was it then? And what kind of care will it be when you do the paring back that you wish to assert? And then we are wherever you take us backward. And I don't know, I guess it will be Obamacare light at that point, because he'll still be in office with the kind of people y'all are offering up to run against it. But things are very troubling. Mr. Rogers, you and Mr. Dix do your jobs admirably. But the cuts that are proposed for this continuing appropriation amendment, the 3rd in the series, the 6th time, do include some pretty substantial measures. And if I just went to one, $115 million in funding for the Agricultural Research Service, including a $44 million reduction for salaries and a $71 million in reduction in building maintenance. As one of several of us in Congress that represents rural and urban areas in the congressional districts we're privileged to serve, it's passing strange to me that we do not understand that the agricultural research services are going to have to recalculate based on this cut. And somebody is going to lose their job. Now, it's fine for us to sit up here with jobs and put stuff on paper that's going to cost people jobs in these rough economic times. Mr. Dix, you said that you're concerned about the potential, you didn't say potential, I've added the word economic harm. What economic harm do you perceive happening? And give me a low figure, no hyperbole, no exaggeration, no Democrat, Republican spin. Just how many jobs will be lost by the best estimate, the lowest number of people that will lose their jobs based on what our colleagues on the other side are proposing?
Well, there's a range of opinion on this. Mark Zandi says it'll be 400,000 jobs.
That's McCain's former economic advisor.
Economic advisor. 400,000 this year, 700,000 next year. The Economic Policy Institute says 800,000. The Goldman Sachs says it can go up to 2.4 million jobs lost. Those are the three that are they're most talked about. And, you know, my view of this is that we're going to have a lot of government jobs lost, but also there's going to be a counter-cyclical impact of these cuts. And with all due respect to the chairman, and I have great respect for the chairman, had we not done the stimulus, unemployment today would probably be 11.5% to 12%. The stimulus did help drive every economist to help to drive down the unemployment rate. And what you all want to do is very noble. You want to reduce the deficit and you want to create jobs and restore the economy. I just worry that by cutting this much spending at this sensitive time in the recovery, that it will have a negative effect and do just the opposite of what you're talking about. You know, cut and grow is...
Of course I will.
Let me just say in response to that, and I appreciate the kind words. We had this discussion on the floor. The only correction I would offer to what you've said is when you said every economist, as you recall, I've cited John Taylor at Stanford University, who is a he was Undersecretary of the Treasury for International Policy. He has a completely different view, one which I happen to respect greatly on this. And so I just would not say every.
Yeah, well, as you remember on the floor, I
Yes,
gave
we
you
had this
6 other Stanford.
Right, and you had yes, you did, and you also had the letter
Of 300.
of the signatures, and we have a similar letter that was provided with maybe not quite as many. I think it was 150 economists. So again, I think it's important.
Well, if I could reclaim my time from both of you, I know Mr. Rogers may wish to say something, but let me say in advance, some of these proposals are offered by President Obama. And let me say pointedly, I disagree with President Obama. What needs to happen here in this Congress and in the White House, and especially in the other body, is people need to sit down and recognize that in this country there's an enormous amount of pain where people are suffering, and we're up here with babble about what we are going to be doing. What needs to happen is we all need to be locked up here until somebody comes out with some solutions. And there are solutions here. And among them are to try to be reasonable with each other as we go forward and figure out where we are with economic recovery. I don't need to have a master's degree or have a PhD in economics to recognize that if we're getting ready to cause a number of people on top of the people that are already out of work to be out of work, and if gasoline prices are going to continue to rise, and if health care prices are going to continue to rise, and if wages are going to have a race to the bottom, then it doesn't take me a whole lot to recognize that what we are doing is just hot air and doesn't add to it. Now, I have one more thing I want to say, Mr. Dix. Until we address Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, all of this is periphery, and we ought to be busying ourselves dealing with that. Japan has this enormous crisis that we just saw. And I heard one of the most sensible Japanese women, I don't think she's anybody's expert, she was asked, what will you do to recover? And she said, we will recover because we are a community. And we will pay the taxes necessary to recover, meaning rich and poor alike. And until this nation is prepared to do that, then we'll go around and around and spiral down. Yes, Mr.
Well, and the only thing I would add to that, what worries me the most in this are programs like WIC, Women and Infant Care. We know that a poor woman who gets nutrition has a healthier baby. We spend $26 billion each year for premature babies that the hospitals have to take care of the care for, which affects Medicare, Medicaid, every single program. And yet we're going to cut out a significant amount of money out of women and infant care. I mean, it's the social safety net, the vouchers for housing, and those kind of programs, Head Start, Pell Grants for these young people when they go to college are being reduced. I mean, we can do this in a more thoughtful way. The first round of the Rogers Amendment I thought was, it was tough, but it was didn't take us to an extreme position. We have got to back off a little bit and find some middle ground here and save some of these important programs that are going to wind up hurting the poorest of the poor. And the president should be ashamed of offering up the community services block grant program.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. McGovern asked for time, and I won't take more time if you'll permit me to yield.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I was trying to make a point when I was cut off that people, I think, need to understand that sometimes through investments you actually you actually reduce costs in other areas. I was mentioning the National Institutes for Health. You find a cure to Alzheimer's disease. The issue of Medicaid and its solvency will never be a problem again. Find a cure to diabetes. Find a cure to cancer. I mean, that's where we should be investing our dollars. It creates jobs, but if we can prevent human misery and on top of that, be able to provide more solvency to some of these programs that right now are difficult, that's what we should. Cutting the National Institutes of Health, but cutting WIC, I mean, I think is heartless. Anyway, I thank the gentleman for yielding.
And a lot of the education programs that are fundamental.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me just say, you all are my favorite team to come before the Rules Committee so far this year. And I look forward to. It's true. It could just be that we've developed a better relationship.
Every Monday we're here.
I tell folks.
I feel like Dancing with the Stars, don't you?
I get to lead them.
I don't see Cynthia. And I talk to folks back home about that relationship that the two of you have. I tell the story, Mr. Dix, the first time I saw you before the Rules Committee, when folks on the committee were complaining that they weren't able to get their amendments made in order, and you said, come to me, and I will help you make this in order, because if it's important to you, it's important to me, and we ought to have a chance to talk about this on the House floor. We shouldn't just talk about it for the C-SPAN cameras. We should talk about it on the House floor, and we should do something about it if it's worth talking about. And that made a big impression on me at the time. Folks,
I wasn't chairman last year. I was down the list.
Absolutely, and as a fellow who wasn't here at all last year, I'm troubled by some of the back and the forth about that, because we do need to take responsibility and talk about need to take responsibility. I'm proud of the responsibility we've taken. There hasn't been a single easy decision that your committee's been asked to make this year. Not one. Not one. And nobody sat around, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Chairman Rogers, I hadn't heard anybody sit around and say, we're on the Appropriations Committee and we're just not going to do it because it's not our fault we got into this mess. I wasn't chairman last year, and we're just going to sit on the sidelines and pass it on. But folks got down to work on day one, and when folks came back and said we needed more, you got down to work again and again and again, and here we are. I don't know. I'm glad you're in talks with somebody on the Senate side, Chairman Rogers, and I don't know if you know, Mr. Dix, of how it is we can spur that process along. How do you have a negotiation with a body that hadn't passed a bill yet?
I think you've got to keep asking your leadership to engage. We have to ask the House leadership to engage, the Senate leadership to engage, and the White House to engage. I mean, they've got to sit down in a room and work this out. This has gone far enough.
And is that fair, Chairman Rogers? I mean, we've got a president who actually presented a budget. He presented his FY11 budget as he was required by law, and 12. He presented both budgets. He's done too. The Senate we passed H.R. 1 to get us through the end of 2011. Then the Senate has done nothing?
Zero.
Zero. Nothing last year, nothing this year.
What
How
if-
do you work with that?
Yeah, what if the House had said, we're not going to pass a bill, you guys need to talk to us? No, they say pass a bill, then we'll talk. And we say, okay, we've passed a bill. You pass a bill, we'll have something to go to conference with to work out differences, and that's the way we do business. But the Senate is just refusing to act. And frankly, the White House has not been engaged fully in this process either. And we're determined, on our side of the aisle, we're determined not to have a shutdown.
Good.
We want this government to continue. It needs to continue. So we're trying our best to get a fair and reasonable funding for the balance of this year so we won't have to shut down the government. I wish the other side would have the same sentiments.
Mr. Dix, do you have any expectation that the Democratic leadership on the Senate side will end up passing a bill of any kind, or do you expect to have to go into negotiations with just ideas?
My view of this is that at some point, the Speaker, the President, and the Majority Leader are going to have to get in the room and come up with a number, and then Mr. Rogers, and I hope on a bipartisan basis, can backfill the numbers and try to put the bill that will do the least damage to the country, and we'll have a vote. It's got to be a compromise. It's not going to be all or one. It has to be somewhere between where the House is and where the Senate is. Now remember, we did, and even though the press just throws this out the door, we did cut $40 billion in the CR for the first CR that went to March 4th from the president's budget request. $40 billion. So, we think we should get a little credit for that. And then we've added this $4 billion and then the 6, and we're over 51. That's halfway there.
And those $40 billion.
And I think some compromise is going to have to be in order.
Those $40 billion go into the baseline now. That $40 billion from December is now in the CBO baseline going forward.
Well,
is that right?
We're $40 billion below the president's budget request for 2011 in what was put in the CR.
But what happens with that $40 billion, with the $3 billion from, or the $2 billion from, $4 billion from 3 weeks ago, the $6 billion here, when we get together to start talking about 2012, when you all start talking about 2012, will those dollars, will those spending reductions be in a new baseline, or are they assumed to continue in perpetuity, or are they assumed to?
Whatever.
Just for the period of the CR.
Just for the period of the CR? Is that?
Well, whatever we finally come up with as the funding level for 2011 in a CR that goes for the balance of the year, that becomes the baseline.
So
And remember, all these cuts have to be imposed in the last 6.5 months. Now it's going to be the last 6 months of this year. That's going to be painful.
But if
some of these programs.
if we zero out the congressional office of Rob Woodall, does that zero, is it assumed to continue into 2012, 2013, 2014, or is it assumed to be reborn
You're in
on
the
October 1st?
constitutions.
Well, but if I were an agency provision, is it reborn on October 1st, 2012, or does it get assumed as a zero in the CBO baseline? Do you know the answer?
It's zero as long as it's zero until somebody appropriates money for it.
So when
That's my view.
So when we're talking about a $6 billion CR spending reduction today, is there a 10-year dollar value on that $6 billion, that it's saving us in interest costs down the road, and it's saving us in programs that are assumed to be zeroed out down the
Just
road?
the 3 weeks.
Just 3 weeks. Okay. Thinking about reality and not fantasy. The reality is there are folks who were sent up here to do some of these tough decisions, and it pains me to hear people talk about jobs, and particularly talk about community, because I couldn't agree with you more, Mr. Hastings. I believe that we have robbed the communities in our districts with the nanny state. With a state that says, don't you worry about your neighbor, we're going to take care of them from Washington, D.C. And it steals dignity from those who need to be taken care of, and it steals dignity from those of us who should be doing the caretaking.
Mr. Woodall, would you yield to me?
Mr. Chairman.
Let me try to correct or properly put an answer to your question earlier about the baseline. The CR is a temporary, whatever we come up with is a temporary number. For fiscal 12, whenever the Congress passes a budget resolution and passes that big spending number, macro number, to the Appropriations Committee, we will then divide up that number amongst the 12 subcommittees. And that becomes the base figure for next year.
And for purposes of beginning that budget process, then is the budget line starting from the 2011 request? Is it starting from the CR passed in December? Is it starting from the final CR that we pass here? What delineates the starting point for that budget
It
resolution?
will be the Budget Committee's.
Yeah.
What is
The
their decision?
president's budget is a recommendation to the Congress, and then the budget resolution, if it's passed, when it's passed, that lays out the parameters.
And that becomes binding on us.
Like I said, there has not been a single easy decision that's come across your desk. I don't actually expect 2012 to contain any easy decisions either, but I do want you to know how much I have come to appreciate the way that you all have worked together and helped me to understand this process better. So I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It looks like we are successfully eliminating some of the funds that were designated for earmarks in several agencies: agriculture, commerce, justice, science, financial services, and interior. Why are we not also eliminating earmarks in defense?
I assume that,
Well, this bill doesn't deal with DOD. That, as you recollect, in H.R. 1 was a separate title. There were 4 titles in that bill, and DOD was one separate title. And we merely plucked from last year's omnibus appropriations bill the defense portion of it. That bill never passed. But we took all the provisions from that bill and dropped them into the H.R. 1, and that deals entirely with DOD.
Are you saying that this bill doesn't have any appropriations for defense?
I'm sorry.
Did you say that this bill does not have any appropriations for defense?
it's a continuing resolution, so it continues at the 10 levels.
H.R. 1 is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
This extends the conversation about H.R. 1 for 3 weeks.
Well,
H.R. 1 contained DOD funding.
yeah, well, I'm talking about what this bill does, not what H.R. 1. So if I understand it, maybe Mr. Dix can clarify. Yeah, Mr. Dix?
Well, I'm just saying, all I'm saying is that this is a continuing resolution, so it deals with the entire government,
Sure.
but it's at the 010 numbers. And we did a separate defense bill, which is put into H.R. 1, which the Defense Department and myself and Mr. Young all want to see enacted as part of the final agreement. So that's where that will go. And the earmarks the money for the earmarks will probably come out of that.
So in that,
To get to a
okay.
compromise number, we're going to need that source.
So so in the defense component of H.R. 1, you have saved money by eliminating the defense earmarks. Is that correct?
We cut it by $3 billion. I'd have to consult the numbers to
Yeah,
find out.
there may
how
be some more
specific
there.
it is.
But that would help us in the end game to get to a number that's a compromise number.
But let me just say this. There will be no earmarks in whatever we do.
Well, there are earmarks in what we're asked to vote on this week. We're still continuing the defense earmarks while we are rolling back certain other earmarks. There's still earmarks in this CR.
No, we're not. We're not.
They're not executing any of the earmarks.
They're delaying that pending the
But
final deal.
in this 3-week continuation, we do veto all earmarks, or earmarks are included in this bill, are stricken in this bill.
From several agencies.
It
that are
eliminates
listed.
$2.6 billion
Yeah.
in agriculture, commerce, justice, science, interior.
But defense is not listed on that list.
As I say, defense is a separate title in H.R. 1. This is a continuation of the conversation about H.R. 1.
So again, while this does, I mean, you could say that for any of the different areas, but it does actually eliminate the earmarks in the listed categories.
Right.
For those, so it
For
does
3 weeks.
For 3 weeks, right? So I mean, and it also continues those categories of earmarks for defense. Although I think what Mr. Dick said is none of that money will actually be spent pending a final deal.
Now, remember, we did take $15 billion out of defense in the $40 billion that we did in the original CR. So, I mean, that may be, but I'm just saying, from the Obama budget request, which for defense was $530 without Milcon, we went at $515. That was something Mr. Young and I agreed to last year and was agreed to by Senator Inouye and Senator Cochran.
But there is a provision in H.R. 1 that says all previous earmarks have no effect in fiscal 11. And if you want to see the language, I have it here.
The President's also said he's going to veto
Right.
any bill with earmarks in it.
So we are then looking at, in a final budget deal, including something along those lines where all of the prior earmarks are removed. Is that correct? All of them across every agency. Okay. Well, I mean, clearly this bill, this CR is a step in that direction,
Remove
but
the earmarks,
yeah.
but leave the money there too. That's another possibility.
The money that would then
Be used
for other purposes. Well, it's money, whether you use it for savings or other purposes or whatever you use it for. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to echo, once again, our thanks for both of you being here today. You know, when you look back in history, and particularly when we look back at what occurred or didn't occur last year in regards to what got us in this predicament right now, as we're talking about a continuing CR, you know, my bigger concern is where are we going to be as it relates to, you know, you don't want to keep coming back. I'm sure you don't want to keep coming back every 2 or 3 weeks. And not that we don't like you, I'd just soon not see you coming back every 2 or 3 weeks. Because the issue is much bigger. I mean, you have issues in regards to the FY12 budget to hammer out to get to where we need to go. And I agree with you, Mr. Dix, that obviously, you know, the Speaker and the leader over in the Senate and the President need to sit down and walk out of a room and come to an agreement in regards to where we need to be on this year's CR. Because right now we're gnashing of teeth. We're pitting each other against each other in regards to what program is more important than the next. But at the end of the day, we're still sitting here struggling with the fact that we have to cut dollars that are currently being spent or allocated to be spent in this upcoming budget, in this current budget that we're in, the 11. There is...
Just if you deal just for a second. I hope that we can look at what we do, and we have a really extraordinary staff. And on some of these really sensitive programs, in the outcome, I hope we can take care of some of these things, like WIC, for example. I just can't imagine cutting that program.
Well, Chairman, you?
Yeah.
The President recommended it.
Well, as I said, sometimes the President makes mistakes too. I mean, WIC is a program, was a congressionally created program. This is one of the most important programs there is. And if you want to spend $26 billion a year on premature babies, we're going to have to pay the bill. It's pay me now or pay me later. I'd rather take care of the poor woman and have her have adequate food when she's pregnant so that she has a healthy baby.
If the gentleman would yield.
Yes.
And I do appreciate your comments and your passion in regards to what you're speaking of, because there are faces behind all these issues. But, I've not heard a good solution yet as to how we're going to cut, because every program, I will say that every program you could stand and defend. There's no doubt in my mind. But how do we get to a point where we actually cut spending? Every spending program, there's a program attached to it. So we're going to have to make tough decisions. And the problem that I see, what I've seen in the past is that there's been no decision made, that it's been punted down the road in regards to coming up with the cuts that we need to make. for America to be successful and prosperous and to create jobs, we've got to take responsibility. And, you know, the discussions that we're having are serious discussions. The implications are serious. But we didn't get elected to make these decisions. Anybody could do that. We've been elected to make tough decisions, realizing that there's tough consequences associated with them. Because if there weren't, anybody could do this.
Well,
But
just
so-
on that point, if you yield, I think what the American people want is to see us get together and work out an agreement. That's what they want to see, and the polls are overwhelming on that number. They want to see us work this out and not keep doing these CRs.
Well-
And you all get that,
If-
I get it.
If you would yield back,
We
obviously.
need to work this out.
If you would yield back. Obviously, you know, we're singing to the choir on some of this because we're working with two other portions of government that don't see it this way. So how do you get them to the table? I think that sooner or later, the issues as it relates to continuing CRs is going to become an issue that forces us to come to the table. It forces those that are resisting the opportunities to make cuts in government and cuts in spending, it's going to force them to come and actually have legitimate discussions in regards to working with folks like yourself. Yes, sir.
If the gentleman would allow me to respond.
Absolutely.
The House is at the table.
I agree.
We've passed our bill. We've laid it on the table. We're sitting at the table waiting to negotiate, to try to get this over with and not close the government down. The other side is not at the table. They won't come up with a paper to present, to lay on the table and say, here's what we think. So we're sitting there waiting for the Senate to come to the table and the White House and say, let's talk. We're ready to talk. In fact, we're talking our ears off, and it's to an empty room.
I agree. It's like going to a dance without a date. It's kind of hard to have a dance.
There may be more going on than people realize.
I yield my time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question I keep asking myself is, why are we here? Why are we even having this conversation? The reason why we're having this conversation is because last month we had the greatest deficit in the history of this country, $223 billion. Why are we here? Is because over the last 4 years, an 84% increase is about $594 billion of additional spending. So here we sit having a conversation about $6 billion, having a conversation about finding a way to fix a short-term CR and the long-term CR. The truth of the matter is we got to get serious about cutting spending. And until we get there, we will continue to have these conversations about a small part of the overall process. And I continue to hear the conversation around benefits for those millions of Americans who desperately need benefits. I don't disagree with the fact that there are millions of Americans that need benefits. I do disagree with the funding proportion, the funding recommendations of those benefits. When we continue to take money from unborn Americans in an attempt to provide benefits for folks today, hence a $223 billion deficit, when do we finally realize that we are now taking away benefits from the next generation of Americans? Unless we get serious about taking a look at being financially responsible, we will never return to financial sanity.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it. And we are always happy to see you, even though we hope you don't have to make too many visits. And we anxiously look forward to the full appropriations process. Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Chairman. Thank you.
That concludes the hearing for consideration of HRES 48. And we will distribute the rule now. Oh, yeah, what do... So what do I do here? I got that. Does Pete have a motion on that? Yeah, okay. Before we consider the rule itself, we would like to now consider the views and estimates on the President's proposed budget for fiscal year 2012, and the Chair will be in receipt of a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee adopt the views and estimates on the President's FY 2012 budget and authorize its transmission to the Committee on the Budget.
You've heard the motion of the gentleman. Any discussion? If not, the vote occurs on the gentleman's motion. Those in favor will say aye. Those
Aye.
opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. Now we'll proceed to consideration of H.J. Res. 48, and the chair will be in receipt of a motion.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.J. Res. 48 the additional continuing appropriation amendments 2011, a closed rule. The rule provides for 1 hour of debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member on the Committee on Appropriations. Rule waives all points of order against consideration of the joint resolution. The rule provides that the joint resolution shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the joint resolution. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit.
You've heard the motion of the gentleman. Any discussion or amendment? Mr. McGovern.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee report an open rule for consideration of H.J. Res. 48 so that all members have the opportunity to offer amendments to this resolution and so that we could have at least one truly open rule in this Congress.
I thank the gentleman for his very thoughtful amendment, and if there's no further discussion, I'll urge my colleagues to vote no so that we can move this matter as expeditiously as possible so that conversations can continue. Those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask for a record vote.
The clerk will call the roll.
No.
No.
Mr. Bishop? No. Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Nugent? No. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Webster? No. Ms. Slaughter? Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. Hastings? Aye. Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Chairman?
No, and the clerk will report the total.
3 yea, 8 nay.
And the motion is not agreed to. Are there further amendments? If not, the vote occurs on the motion of the gentleman from Dallas, Mr. Sessions. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. And Mr. Woodall will be running. Oh, you'd like a roll call on that? Clerk will call the roll.
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter?
Aye.
Mr. Bishop? Aye. Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Nugent? Aye. Mr. Scott? Aye. Mr. Webster? Yes. Ms. Slaughter? Mr. McGovern? No. Mr. Hastings? No. Mr. Polis? No. Mr. Chairman?
Aye, and the clerk will report the total.
8 yea, 3 nay.
And the motion is agreed to, and accordingly, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall, will be managing for the majority, and Mr. McGovern for the minority. And let me just say to members that we will be meeting at 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon for consideration of, on the two financial services measures. Yes, tomorrow at 3 o'clock.
What do we think about for Wednesday?
I'm not sure yet. We don't have a time set, but we have announced further legislation for the week, and we'll look forward to letting you know when we're going to have a meeting. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.